welcome to the show. I'm James, that's Katie, and of course that makes this episode 59 of the Circles and Squares PlayStation podcast, part of the Circles and Squares podcast experience. And as always, Kate, welcome to you and your Bloodborne tattoo on this lovely Sunday morning. How are you?
You know what? I'm really good. I had an exciting morning. I mean, first of all, I played a bunch of Elden Ring. But second of all, I did my Wordle this morning, and would you believe I got the word on my first guess?
Oh my god, it's like what I've been trying to do. I guess the word,
Yeah.
I don't do Wordle every day, but whenever I
hmm
do it, I probably do like, 3 or 4 of them a week, and I always start with
Right.
blank, BLANK, because one day it's going to be
Mhm.
blank,
One
and
day.
it's going to be the best day of my life.
Well, would you know that I do a different word every day and I've sniped it twice? So
Oh my
perhaps
god.
there's an inherent strategy and just it's an intuition. Like I had a good feeling this morning. There was just so much
I had a
power
good
in my
feeling.
spirit and I just sniped it.
So what was the word?
Well, I can't.
Well,
Oh,
you
I guess
can.
this
This
will
is
go
going
alright.
out
The
tomorrow.
word the word ironically was power, and
Oh
that is
wow.
exactly how I feel today.
If there's a demonstration of power in 2022, I think it is sniping a Wordle in one word. What was the other one you got on the first try?
I cannot remember the other one I got on the first try was. It was some, like it wasn't sword, but it was, like, some other kinda
Sword.
I do start with sword a decent amount, I will
Holy shit.
say.
All right. Well, if you need Wordle strategy, I guess go to Kate
Yeah.
on that. But hey, everybody, this is a video game podcast, and we're here to talk about.
Wordle's kind of a video game,
No, for
you
sure,
know?
it is. Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
easing our way in with the casual sort of word games and into TMNT spoilers for what's coming up, everybody. But just before we talk about the games that we have been playing, I would like to go over a couple things at the introduction, namely that you can now subscribe to this podcast with our membership through Anchor, our hosting service. So for just $1 a month, you can subscribe to our lovely show. We don't have any bonus content. That's the negative side. But the positive side is that all the proceeds we raise this year are going to be donated to women's abortion funds in the United States to support women's right to choose. And that's a way better cause than getting a couple bonus episodes from us right now. So
Yes.
please donate to that if you have the ability to do so. We really appreciate it. And like we said, it is all for charity at this time. So that's perfect. And the second thing we'd like to remind you of just at the top of the show is that usually this show is closed out by us answering a listener mail question, but we don't have one lined up for this week, unfortunately. So we'd like to just use this spot right off the top to remind everybody to write in some listener mail questions. If you have anything you would like to ask us, you can do so at circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com on the email side, or of course you could also tweet us if you'd prefer to get us that way at CNSPod, and just ask us some of your favorite questions, because we've had some really interesting ones the last couple of times we've done listener mail. We had one Frank builder Frankenstein game, so like taking games from different parts and different aspects of games and like building out what we'd like to play. It was really, really fun. And we also had one the other week, which was which 3 characters from games would we like to go to the bar with and spend a night, and that was just like hilarious to answer that. So yeah, write in some questions. We'd love to answer them, and we get to every single one eventually on the show. And that'd be really great if you wanted to do that. So let's get into it today, Kate. We're talking about the games we've been playing, obviously, and then we're talking the second half of the show on games we would like to see make a comeback in the future. And the reason that question got sparked is because we played last night a game that did come back from the dead. We played the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge beat 'em up game. We've been planning to do for a while. We had 5 people lined up. We all sat down. Too bad we couldn't get to that full, I think it's 6
I
people
think
as
it's
max,
6.
right? But
Yeah.
we got to 5, and yeah, we went through the whole game last night. What were your impressions of Shredder's Revenge?
It was basically exactly what I expected, and I had a blast. It's just those games are so fun, like, they're not the kind of thing I would wanna sit down and play all the time, but on occasion, especially with a good group of friends, like, you get all your turtles together. Like, the one thing we didn't do was order pizza, and we're like, "We should have
What a
freaking ordered
letdown!
a
Hey, I know you
pizza."
guys ordered like Lebanese food, and like nothing's.
Yeah.
It was obviously really good, and like that's fine, but the theming was just off.
Yeah, really coulda had a pizza. I think that's the only thing we were missing, but it was a ton of fun, and, like, it's just so cool to see that game come back, and it plays, like, the Turtles theme song starts at the beginning when you first open up the game, and it's just such like, you cannot play it without having the biggest, stupidest smile on your face.
Definitely, yeah. It was so retro. Like I remember even when we started the game up, and it has the theme song plays, and I don't think it's the exact one like from the TV show, but it was so reminiscent of that original
Mm.
cartoon, and you're just like, yeah, the Ninja Turtles are fucking cool. You know, I haven't thought about these guys for so long, aside from that like
Mhm.
shitty Michael Bay movie, but like the cartoon Turtles, man, it was like a blast from the past. You know, you're instantly reminded of that show. I guess for those of you that would have grown up with it. But yeah, it was fun, and like something about everyone picking their character and like, oh, what are your stats? You know, do you have the range or the power?
Yeah.
Like it's just all meaningless at the end of the day. You're really just kind of mashing buttons, or at least how we were playing it was like. I'm sure there's like a high level of like if you want to go and turn up the difficulty and stuff, because some of the game was actually very tough. But in general, it's just fun to button mash and screw around and see where the levels are, and laugh at the funny foot soldier guys who are like in the bakery in the background of a level wearing a little hat.
Going.
Like,
And then of course like they like finish making the cake and then they jump out at you and like it's just cool, and everyone has like their own special moves, right? Like you go along, you're leveling up, and you're like, we have this new special ability, and it's like, okay, Donatello's is different because he's got a stick, and then like Raph's is different, and like the character cast is fun too. Like April ended up being one of our favorite characters, I think,
mhm.
collectively as a group. We're all super in her, and then unlocking Casey once you finally beat the game was super exciting. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So just to back up a little bit for people that have maybe not heard of this game, there used to be quite a few of these Ninja Turtles beat 'em up games. There was some on NES, there was arcade games, and this is kind of a genre that hasn't fully gone away. There's been stuff like River City Girls and Dragon's Crown and whatnot, but these beat 'em ups, I guess, like they're not as popular as they once were in like the arcade sort of era. And so this game really is a throwback, similar to, if anyone's been listening to the podcast in the past, we talked about Streets of Rage 4 from the same publisher, Dotemu, who's kind of like bringing these games to the modern era, I guess, like in terms of publishing and everything. And so this is the follow up to that, but it's a side scrolling beat 'em up. There's what I think 15, 16 levels or something in the game. Um,
uh,
Something like that. And so you're just kind of going left to right, kind of, some of the levels are on the hoverboard, some of them are on foot, and you're kind of just beating guys up. You're doing your combos, you're unlocking moves, you're using specials, eating different kinds of pizzas. One of them like makes you spin around like a hurricane. And like
it lasts so long. It is outrageous.
yeah, it's tons of fun.
Um,
But yeah, so I think I had a good time playing this game too, honestly. The one thing that you touched on was unlocking Casey at the end. So there's kind of five, I guess, like Splinter, April, Casey, and then the four turtles. So there's seven
mhm.
characters, but only six players you can play as. And I guess like one of the things I wanted to ask you, now that I've kind of, we played this and sat on it last night and kind of thought about it, was, do you think that the characters all seemed unique enough to what you were expecting?
I mean, I think they could have been a little more different. I think that would have been nice. I think the problem is I think the turtles all seemed very similar, and then the extra characters felt quite different. Like I
Hmm.
would say, like especially we had a Splinter on our team, and a lot of his moves seemed a little bit more unique. Like they ultimately do the exact same thing, but just even some of the animations for them. Whereas like the turtles, like we get a move and it's like when you do your dash or your dodge and then you get a special move out of it. And all of us were kind of like sort of like a falcon kick from Smash or like the bicycle kick. We were calling it like the Liu Kang, and then like we kind of all moved forwards with it, and then did the attack at the end. And so they were different, but they all were very much like reskins of the same move. Whereas Splinter's version was he kind of like stands still and then more shoots out projectiles, and so it covers the same amount of ground and effectively is the same move, but it always seemed a little bit more like visually distinct. And so I think maybe that is one way that the game could have been improved. But I also don't think it was a negative. Like it was very clear who was doing what a lot of the time, even though it was very hectic, which is impressive. And it definitely was still exciting to be like, ah, that turtle, like I want to be Leo, he's the coolest one. Or like, Donatello, and like they have little like taunt moves, and like Donatello pulls out his Game Boy, and like, you know, Raph laughs for some reason, which maybe was kind of weird,
Yeah,
but
really out of character. Like, what do you mean you're having fun, Raph? You're supposed to be like grumpy.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
at least not as much of an edgelord as I remembered it.
Yeah, I think I would say the same thing. It's like I love the turtles as characters. I think their personalities are all unique. It is fun to
Hmm.
sort of in the same way it's like, fun to pick a Power Ranger or something. Like you all just kind of pick a color and you're like, oh, whatever. I like this guy. But I think the only thing is like in terms of, the move sets, I found like I was hoping they would feel a little bit more distinct. Like
Hmm.
after we made it through the campaign, like I was playing as Leo, and I think who were you during the
I
campaign?
was
You were Raph,
Raphael.
that's right. And
Yeah.
I was playing. We were playing through the campaign, just on normal, and it was fun, right? And then afterwards, we beat the game. We unlocked Casey, and we're like, well, let's just try on the
Yeah.
arcade mode. Um, just going through like see how far we can make it on a limited number of lives and try out some different
Hmm.
characters because no one had played Donatello, so I picked him the second time through, and then you took Casey, right?
Hmm. I
Um,
took Casey. Yeah.
and so like maybe just because I got another turtle myself too, but I was kind of like, okay, Leo was kind of like 2 range, 2 speed, 2 attack, and everything's rated from like a 1 to 3 level. So he's like very
Hmm.
down the middle, like very basic. Whereas Leo or Donatello had he had one like perfect range, but I think his speed was lower or something. So
Hmm.
and it felt almost identical to play. Like the combos really were very similar. I mean, maybe his moves
Hmm.
came out a bit slower, but aside from like purple sort of animations on him, it didn't really feel that much different. And
Hmm.
just because of how similar the turtles are, I don't know how they would have got around it, but I'm just thinking in comparison to my time with Streets of Rage 4, which I really really enjoyed. I think something that game has on top of this one is that the characters are all feeling very distinct. Like some of them are different sizes. The way they move around can be different. They just seem to have a little bit more of a distinct move set between each one, whereas this is kind of like, just variations on the speed of like how fast they attack and like very minor differences. But I just could see it being a little bit less fun to replay over and over in this game in comparison to something with a bit of a more varied cast.
Yeah, I agree, and especially because the game is relatively short as well. Like we beat it a lot quicker than I anticipated we would. Like I didn't think we'd beat it in a sitting. I thought we'd play, get relatively far and then, put it back on the shelf for another night. But we beat the whole game, which I think is good. Like I don't think it necessarily felt too short, but I think with
Yeah.
that smaller like the smaller playtime, it does encourage you to want to go back and try harder difficulties or beat all the challenges. And it would be nice to do that by, also getting that aspect of replayability from the various characters, especially because they are so fun and like they all have different weapons and you could easily play into that a little bit more, I think.
It would be cool if they all had like a. I was thinking like there's no these games don't have like a light and heavy attack buttons. It would be cool if
Hmm.
the light attack was the same for each turtle, but their heavy attack could be different. Like you know I'm thinking like, oh, what if Donatello like swung the stick around over his head and like it had a big AOE or something that because he's got the
Hmm.
range, and then Raph could have like a really
You could
strong
do some like,
stab or
yeah,
something
some
like.
shorter stabs and
Yeah, I feel like there might be a way to have like expanded the move sets just a little bit to make them a little more unique, but I don't know if that's nitpicking or not. Like I'm by no means an expert on like this genre of game, but I know like another
Mhm.
thing Streets of Rage had was that game has like the weapons laying on the ground that you can kind of pick up and throw or like
Mhm.
attack with, and little things like that. I think you don't do it often, but it breaks up your gameplay just a little bit because this can become a little bit like you're just pressing that one attack button. Like one of the guys we were playing with was literally like, "Oh, is there a button aside from X?" Ha ha ha. But like he's not wrong, right? Like you kind
Yeah.
of do just press X over and over again just for your combo. It'd be nice to have like that one little extra element of like, "Oh, I picked a weapon up off the ground, so now I'm attacking differently," or like,
Yeah.
a little bit more variety in terms of what you could do.
Yeah, you're right, and that's a good point too, because there weren't really any things you could interact with in the levels. Like there were the pizzas, and like the spin one did different things, and but they were mostly for healing. And then there were things you could like interact with, like there'd be traps that you could like throw an enemy into, and like exploding barrels and stuff like that. But there weren't any of the classic like, oh, I found a rock on the ground and you can pick it up and throw it, and like that kind of stuff that I think is sort of typically a staple within the genre. And I didn't notice it while we were playing, but now that you bring it up, like, it is kinda strange that that's
Yeah,
just not a feature.
I hadn't noticed that either myself. And then to be honest with you, I was just as I was getting ready to do this show, I watched like a little bit of Streets of Rage just to bring up that comparison, and I saw it and I was
Mhm.
like, Oh yeah, like there wasn't weapons to pick up, and I just thought that was an interesting choice. Like they could have, I mean, I guess you can only criticize what the game has itself, and it's not like it's a huge negative, but it's just something that I guess could have been in it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I don't
mhm.
think this is like a game that's gonna redefine the genre at all. I don't think it necessarily needs to be. Like, I think it's a fun time, especially if you have that like Turtles nostalgia. But I think if you're not really someone who's ever associated with the Turtles, like I think you'd have fun playing with it, but I don't think it I think that's like what stands out the most about it is how fun the cast is and how exciting and like nostalgic it is to get back into that world. And if you've never really experienced that, I don't think this game is gonna blow you away.
Mm. Well, I know it's been. I mean, it's gotten really good reviews, and I don't mean to
Mhm.
like. I still think this has been a
Yeah,
very positive time. Like it was really
yeah,
fun. And one thing, like just to double down on it, is like the stylization of the game and like the
yeah.
environment is amazing. Like the environments you're going through, the pixel art of it all, the like the
Mhm.
way each enemy looks, like the Foot Clan, they look great. The bosses like Bebop and Rocksteady and all the
Yeah.
Krang and all those familiar characters, even the side characters like Vernon and whoever else, like the good guys, they're all like really really well done. Like the voice acting is fun. Like the game just presents itself visually and like auditorily is like
Mhm.
it's like a 10 out of 10 in those aspects. Like it's great.
Yeah,
I don't think it could
absolutely,
be
and
better.
absolutely, and the writing was really cute too, like, there's a lot of, like it's kinda slapstick and silly, but it was pretty funny, we were laughing a few times, and,
Yeah,
um,
can you
I
find
think
my VHS tapes?
that guy was so
That's
weird.
Vernon.
That's a Vernon. I don't remember Vernon, but he's a weirdo.
I
But
think he
yeah,
was April's
there's a
cameraman, right, in the show.
Oh, that makes sense, yeah,
And he's like
that
an
makes
absolute idiot, and then April's like always having to put up with
yeah.
his antics. Yeah.
Right, 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 yeah, and she's clearly the badass of the relationship.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I sound too I will say I think the boss fights were pretty good in this game. They were challenging, especially a few of them. Like there was one where there's a car you're fighting, and I don't really know how to describe it other than like if you played this game and you figured out the best way to fight that car, like we could not.
I
We
think
brute force
it
that
was the
one
stage
so
3
hard.
boss, right? Stage
Yeah.
3 boss. Yeah, that game, I think there was a couple bosses like that one and maybe one other, I can't, like that were seemingly like way tougher than the rest of the game. That one car, like when we played arcade mode afterwards, we had 3 continues among the 5 of us and it bodied us. Like we didn't even really die before that and we lost literally all of our lives to that one car.
We
And
did.
like what are we
We
supposed to do?
lost that car more than we lost to Shredder at the end, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was pretty fun, like, I think my favorite thing in these games is, easily, like, my favorite boss was the rat boss.
The Rat
He
King,
was
yeah.
pretty cool. The Rat King, like, he kind of, like I think these games do the best when they, like, have that section where you're able to fight him, but then he kinda, like, gets away from the fight, and then you have, like, kind of the dodging section because that's, like, sort of the 2 aspects, right? You're either fighting or you're dodging, and some of the bosses kind of incorporate that where you have, like, phases where you're doing one or the other, and I think that's pretty fun, like, Shredder at the end is some cool, like, dodging where he's put a bunch of fire on the screen and you gotta, like, get away from it, and then now here's your chance to attack him, and I kind of like you learn that pattern and you sort of play it out more so than just the ones where like you're just beating him up.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And another one I would shout out, kind of that was a standout boss, was the guy with the sewer grates, and there was like 5 grates on the
Yeah.
ground, almost like a whack-a-mole type of setup, and he would like jump out of them and then attack you, and then go down back into the sewer, and you sort of had to figure out like, okay, which opening is he going to come from? Like, I got to time my
Mhm.
attack so that he's like not going to go back down there and dodge it. Just a little bit more to it than just a big meat shield kind of guy where you're fighting him like in a regular stage. And those are the fun ones. You're right. The Rat King, I think, was my favorite too, for the same
The Rat
reason.
King. And then there's that other one that was a bit of a puzzle, and I don't want to spoil it because it was like it wasn't a super hard
Mm.
puzzle, but it felt very satisfying when we figured out what we were supposed to do because he's kind of invulnerable. And then you have a phase where you're like, he just sort of isn't you're just not able to interact
Yeah,
with
yeah,
him, and then you have to do something to bring him back, and it's like, "Oh, it was really cute when we figured out what we had to do."
yeah, yeah. And it's like that little like really light element of puzzle solving where these games don't really have that, but once in a while when they throw just like a little twist in on there, and you
Hmm.
feel like really smart for a second, and it's kind of like the whole group of people, or at least for us because we were playing in a group, was like, oh yeah, we figured it out, and like it's just kind of
Yeah.
like a camaraderie type of thing, which this games like this can really bring out, I think, which is nice. um yeah, any final thoughts about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kate? This is overall, I think, a pretty positive
I
one for us.
Pretty positive. I think there's one other thing we have to shout out, and that is the soundtrack to this game. Like, I didn't remember specifically so much rap being in Turtles, but like that might have just been I was young and I'm not remembering it perfectly. But like there was at one point I think where I realized that like we didn't have the music at max volume. Like it starts it out and it's like just the default setting is not maxed. And I will tell you, the best thing you can do playing this Turtles game is you max out the volume. And once we did that, like every track is such a banger in this in this game.
Yeah, it's great. And I mean, the music is done by, I'm just looking it up now, T Lopez. He's the guy that did so he did some Streets of Rage 4 music. He did Sonic
Mhm.
Mania. He did this. He's
That makes
doing
sense.
Metal Slug Tactics, League of Legends music, actually. Like, this guy
Oh,
is,
interesting.
he's in a lot of projects. And one other thing about this too, which I didn't realize until right now, is they actually had the original Turtles voice cast from 1987 in the cartoon in this
Really?
game. So that is really
That
cool
is
too.
cool.
But yeah, max the volume, and don't
Yeah.
just turn your TV up. You go into the game settings and max
Yeah.
out specifically the music volume, so it doesn't get drowned out by like the fighting sound effects. And that's the way to go for Ninja Turtles. So this game gets a pass, and we would recommend it to you if you're interested.
Yeah.
Um,
You gotta grab some friends. You gotta grab some pizza. That's what we messed up on. Just, have a cowabunga old time.
all right, so we have one more game to talk about today, which is another one that we've both played. Although this was asynchronous, not at the same time.
Mhm.
It would have been a very long session to sit down and play this one together. And this is a game called Monster Sanctuary, which is a creature capturing sort of game. We play those from time to time. And this one is interesting because it is not a traditional sort of RPG setup. It's actually presented as a Metroidvania. So you're sort of going around a map in a Metroidvania style. It actually looks a lot like Maple Story, a game which
Yes.
we've both played a lot of.
Yeah.
But the
Sounds a
environment
lot like it
specifically,
too.
the environments specifically
Mhm.
look a lot like Maple Story. Like, have you ever been to Ant Cave in Maple Story, Kate? And
Oh my
you look at some of
god,
the
yep.
caves in this game, and you're like, wow, where are the horned mushrooms? Where are the green mushrooms?
Yes. I have to kill 999 for that
Yeah, of
signpost.
course. The signpost told me to do this.
Yep.
Um, so you recommended this game to me. I think you'd been playing for maybe a week or so before you kind of mentioned it. And it was on Game Pass and it looked appealing. So I downloaded this game and I was just, walking along the sidewalk, and then just like in Ninja Turtles, I fell down a manhole and I never came out of it until I beat this game. I was so addicted to Monster
Yeah.
Sanctuary that I just inhaled it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I had the same kind of experience. Like I told my friends about it because I saw the game. I thought it looked pretty cool. I told my friends like you gotta play Monster Sanctuary. So two of them started and they're like, Katie, you gotta play Monster Sanctuary too. Like and they kept talking about it in front of me. Like guys, I'm not gonna play Monster Sanctuary. Like I just don't have time. Like it looks cute, but I can't prioritize like B tier games right now. It's not gonna fit in my life. And then I was like having a quiet evening one time. I was watching some Bake Off, you know, as you do, relaxing. I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll just try Monster Sanctuary for like an hour. And I like fell in the exact same manhole and just like plowed through the game.
yeah.
Um, it's awesome.
It
It's a
can
great
really do
game.
that to you too, and I think, like, I know we'll get into it, but I think it is like a lot stronger of a game in the first half as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so like you're really accumulating a lot of different monsters. You are leveling them up. Every monster has its own sort of skill tree, which you can go down and you get a point every time you level up. So unlike something like Pokemon where you just sort of level up and see what you get, in this game you're like, every level you get a point and you can put it into a skill tree. So whether that's upgrading a
right.
stat or like getting a new move, you're just always progressing. At least at the start and through like the first kind of, for the majority of the game at least. And that's something that's just like, it's that drip feed of dopamine, and like not only you're getting new monsters but you're leveling them up, and then, oh, but now I need to sub my team out, and you're just, it's just so compelling. And if you have that kind of piece of you that gets interested in those type of aspects of these games, then you're gonna love it, because that's exactly what gets me. That's why I love Digimon Cyber Sleuth so much.
That's why
Same
Cyber Sleuth is the
aspect, right?
king of those
Cyber Sleuth's
games.
the king. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of cool. I think yeah, it's like 2D. Yeah, picture Maple Story. It's 2D. You play as like the monster. You're like
You're
a
like a tamer
creature
or
capture,
whatever.
a tamer. And you start with like one of like a legendary monster. You get to pick a few ones. I think you started with the
I had the
wolf, I
wolf,
believe,
the blue wolf, yeah.
the blue wolf, and I had the red lion, who I was a big fan of. And then yeah, as you go, you're just constantly catching them. So the catching I thought was kind of interesting as well is that you don't have like Pokeballs and like there's not really shopping or like items you have to worry about. It's just when you get into a battle, you fight the monsters, and then depending on how well you do, there's a rating system that gives you 1 to 5 stars. And the more stars you get, the more likely you are to get better items and like money from beating the fight. And the item that you care about from beating the fight is a monster egg of one of the monsters you fought. So I kind of like that because I always found in Pokemon it was like kind of a chore. Like I know catch them all is like the thing you're doing, but it feels like a chore halfway through the game when you've just been like catching stuff for so long and like you fucking know you're never going to use Ekans, right? Like Ekans doesn't have a spot on my team, but like I guess I better catch him. Whereas in this one like you just sort of get them as you go, and that was kind of nice. Like it felt like the game was a lot faster than something like Pokemon where you're constantly like, "Oh, I ran out of balls. I better go back to the store." Um
Yeah, I agree with that. The only caveat, I guess, to play devil's advocate, because I think it is a better system overall, is just that there was a couple of times when I really wanted a certain creature,
mm,
but you know, you just kind of have that random chance of getting its egg when you beat it, and so if you don't get the egg, or you get the egg of like a different creature that was in the battle, you have less autonomy in like picking when you get a certain creature, so it can get a little bit like, oh, you know, I guess I missed them, I guess I have to redo that battle and like try again. And that can happen in Pokemon too, but I mean, if you have like 50 Pokeballs, you could just sit there and spam them, whereas in this you're
right.
sort of having to redo it. But it's such a minor
Yeah.
gripe.
I would say as a counter to that, like, sure, you might take like 3 or 4 battles to get the egg, but you never have Pokemon like Surskit where it has like a 3% chance of showing up in the battle.
This is
Like it's
true.
just the monsters are like always on that area of the map. So like it side scrolls and you're on like these small little map tiles, and when you get to the far end of one, you go to the next map tile. And so every map tile, I believe, has like the monsters always are there. Like it's
Yeah.
the same 3 guys.
Yeah.
So like it is kind of like at least predictable in that way.
Well,
If you
this is why
really
random battles in RPGs are not good, and everyone should move to the modern system of enemies on the map.
enemies on the map. And I think another thing to point out that's important too that makes it very different is that it's a 3v3 game. So you still have your party of 6, but every time you go into a battle, you get to see what you're fighting, and then you get to choose 3 of your 6 to send in, which is kind of cool. And like they all get experience and they all level up the exact same. It doesn't matter if they were participating in the battle or not, but it just lets you kind of choose where like I sort of had a team of 3 that I kind of they were my like my A team, they were my go-to, but then I had a couple extra ones that I would sub in if like I needed certain coverage for a certain type of fight. And that was really fun because I find with like Pokemon again, it can feel a little bit limiting sometimes where you're like, it's hard to change your monsters because you're so entrenched in like this is my team, or when you do you're like, well, I have to have another fire type or something, you're like I can't have 2 fire types. But with this game, like I think it's a little bit more flexible. Like there's a lot of synergies that you can build with your team, and then also because of the skill trees you can build monsters into different niches. So like it can be very much like a lot of them like they could be very supportive or it could be very offensive just depending on how you decide to go down the skill trees, because it's not like one tree that kind of goes up. It's like 3 or 4
Mm-hmm,
different
mm-hmm.
trees, and you choose to go down, and you don't get enough points for all of them. So you will ignore part of their kit entirely and spec into something else. So like it's kind of daunting at first because you don't really know what you're going to want and what everything does. But as you go, I feel like you kind of learn organically, and you sort of like start picking up on cool stuff. Then you get a new monster, and you're like, oh, hang on, like that actually goes with this really well. I'm like, oh, hang on, and what if I put him here? And then you really do create a team, and it's very satisfying creating something that works well together, but it's also not super difficult and like you're sitting in menus forever, which I think is a huge plus.
I definitely had a few times where I did feel like I was sitting in menus for a while, because you can sort of go into a bit of depth in terms of like equipping your creatures with different items or feeding them
Right.
different foods so their stats can go up in certain aspects. Or like there was
Yeah.
a few times, like you say, where you're like, oh, I was really specking this guy into like a magic attack, but I've now with the creatures I put on my team, like I need a physical attacker, so you can kind of get like a reset thing where you can redo their
Mhm.
skill trees. But in general, I totally agree. And when it comes to building out with the skill tree and choosing what you're specking into, that's something that like we're crutching on Pokemon as an example here, but it's a really good example because it is like
Yeah.
the most prevalent creature game, the one the most people have played. And it's not that you can't in Pokemon. There's just as much variety in how you want to build your skills out and how you want to build your moveset. But I think the problem is that the game doesn't show you the skill tree from the start. Whereas in this game, you can kind of like, okay, I got a new monster. What are his skills? So you'll go to his page and you'll see like, okay, so he can do like ice damage, bleed damage, or like healing, and you can already see right in front of you when he gets to level 40 what the potential skills you can have are.
Mhm.
Whereas in Pokemon, it's like sure you might get to there, but if you already have like if you don't know what's coming up, you can't like envision what to make the Pokemon before you see what the moves are. So it's a
Mhm.
little bit less like pre-planned out, I guess, than this game. Um,
Yeah, I think this game has a lot of, like, passive stuff you can give them too, so, like, Pokemon come with an ability, and that is like, there's a million abilities in Pokemon, right? Like, it's very varied, but, like, you don't really get to choose, they come with it, whereas in this game, like, a lot of your skill tree is kind of just, like, passive stats or abilities that you're adding on as well, so, yeah, you still have, like, maybe only 4 moves that you really use, and oftentimes I would use, like, the same 1 or 2 moves and not even, like, as many as you necessarily have in Pokemon, but I think those, like, passive things really felt like they made
yeah,
a
they
big
did.
impact.
Totally. So just about the battle system then before we move completely past it. There's a few different formats of battles in this game. So it
Mhm.
is the 3v3, but you have a team of 6. And against like regular enemies, it's just like they'll have 3 in their party. You'll pick your 3 and we'll see who wins. And then there's also two other kinds of battles you can do. One of which is like I think it's called like a totem battle, or not
Mhm.
totem, but there's like, super powerful monsters you run into, and they're often by themselves or like maybe with a couple other minions. And in that battle, it's the same kind of thing, but you're against a more powerful opponent. And there's also something called, are they tamer battles or like
Mirror
what
battles,
is
I
it? It's when
think.
you're fighting another person. So there's some
Yeah.
NPCs you have to battle against, or like I think you can fight each other online too if you wanted
They're
to. We should
online.
totally do that when you beat the
We
game
should.
and like see whose team's gonna win. But those ones are cool because they kind of have a different order to it. Like if you do a tamer battle, um, whoever goes first, you can only do an action with 2 of your 3 monsters before you and then you pass your turn, and then it goes to normal after that. But when your creatures die in a tamer battle, you can actually bring in your next sub from from your reserve 3 when they
Mhm.
die. Whereas in regular battles, you don't get to bring in another guy, and I never quite understood why that was. Because if I was
Mhm.
fighting random monsters and like they took out my guy, I would just like send out another one. But I mean, it's just the mechanic of the game, right? But
Yeah.
it's the tamer
Just
battles for sure are like very interesting because you kind of have that aspect of like, okay, so this guy is like sort of half dead. Should I let him die now and bring in one of my subs who might be able to help me more, or should I try and heal this guy up? Or
Mhm.
like, who am I gonna sub in next? How is that gonna change my strategy? Because all my offensive guys are in the back and like all my defensive guys are out now. So there's a lot of like
Yeah.
timing and like planning out of how you want to do the battle from the
Yeah.
start.
It added an interesting aspect too, like, I had one that was, like, super squishy, but had some really neat supportive stuff, and so I didn't find that they were very useful in their regular battles because, like, they get the buffs out and then they just die, but then I'd be down a monster, whereas in the ones where you could sub in, I would send it out, buff the shit out of my, like, hardcore carry character, and then that support would die, but I'd send in someone else. And so then that slot was like, it was like a good strategy to use at the start, whereas in normal battles, it was a bad strategy because it would leave me with an empty slot. And so it was kind of cool how like just those little things do actually change how you strategize. And some of the fights get pretty difficult that you actually really do need to come in with a plan. Otherwise, you're either A, not going to beat it, or B, like you're not going to get the 5-star, which like does matter because when you 5-star, they're like the totem, like they're really hard, kind of like boss monsters. The only way to get their egg is to get the 5-star. And if you get a 5-star on them, you get it automatically.
Oh, I didn't know
It's
that.
not
I
a
never did
chance.
it. I never got a
Yeah.
5-star on one of those.
I got them on the goblin guy. That's how I found out
Mm.
because his goblin team was really weak to physical damage, and at the time my team was just like physical damage like crit team, and so I just like steamrolled them by virtue of my team being like a super hard counter, and I got the goblin king, and I was like, oh, you can
Mm.
get them, and so I looked into it, and that is a thing. So like it's kind of cool for completionists because you get those like really powerful monsters is the only way to do it.
That is cool. Yeah. I never did that. I should probably, well, I
Yeah.
mean, it's not, I don't think
But
I'm going to
like
go back, but yeah.
yeah, but you really do like you couldn't just beat it with any team. Like you really do have to like craft a team for it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool for those sort of like, like people who are into the more challenge as opposed to just kind of getting through the game and doing the main story.
Yeah, I agree with you too. There was a couple of battles I can think of. There was two in particular. One of them was one of the totem battles, and one of them was when you have to fight. You have there's four like those starting creatures you can pick from, and so you kind of have these three NPCs that each take the ones you don't pick, and they're like your rivals of a sense. And one of the battles against one of your rivals, I don't know if you remember, but that girl you have to fight her at one point, and she just like I was flying through the game at that point, and she just was like a hard roadblock for me. Like she put her team down, and it's like I ran directly into like a stone wall. Like I was like, how the fuck am I gonna beat her? So I ended up like
Yeah.
changing my team out and making a few tweaks, and I got past. But it was like, yeah, there was a couple of moments like that, and so I think like the one thing I wanted to say about the game, which is a negative on the sense of the battle system, which I think overall is great. There's two things. One of them's a minor complaint. One of them is a bit bigger. My minor complaint is that, like you were saying, there's a lot of passive sort of effects that happen in these battles. And while I think that's awesome for the synergy, I think one of the things that happens, especially later in the game, is that it's like impossible to keep track of exactly what buffs and debuffs and status effects are like on every mon. And it eventually just becomes like things are you like finish your turn and then everyone starts taking a bunch of damage and you're not exactly like 100% sure where it's all coming from because you'll have
Yeah.
like poison damage, burn damage, bleed damage, and then you'll have like I had a character that was like for every attack you do another hit that's like worth 25% of your mana amount, and then you've got a 50% chance of another attack happening if this, and if they're
Yeah.
chilled then this happens, and you're just like they're taking a bunch of damage and you
Yeah.
get used to seeing it because you're like, oh, this is what my characters do. But if I were to sit and like list out all the damages that are going to happen, like I don't know, I'm just kind of looking at the estimates of how much life is going to be taken off and like
Yeah.
going by that. But so it's a little hard to keep track of, but that's fine. Like it is what it is. My bigger complaint with the battle system was just that I found, especially as the game went on, sort of in the second half, is that the battles are just really, really long. And I don't know if that's a function of like how I built my team. I do think my team ended up being a little defensive, but that's just sort of how I found I was able to get through the game. But I just found like the battles, they get kind of drawn out because there is a lot of healing, a lot of shielding, and I think like part of it could be just that that's how I had constructed my team, was like it could have maybe been a bit more offensive, but at the same time, like if you don't have enough defense on your team, I feel like you get bodied really fast, so you have to have a reasonably defensive team. And I just sort of found like, okay, well, some of these battles could take like 4 or 5 minutes, and a lot of the time I know I'm going to win from the very start. Like I very rarely lost any of these battles. Like I'm going into it, I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to win, but it's going to take me a long time. And Pokemon gets a lot of criticism for like, oh, you just send out your guy with the type advantage and use your strongest move. Well, I mean, yeah, that's not very interesting, but at the same time, like the battle's over in 5 seconds. And so you can just move along. Whereas with this, it's like, oh, now I have to sit here and like kind of go through these motions when I already know that it's going to be over pretty like without any chance of losing. But it's just like, oh, it got a little tedious towards the end. in that way, which is like something I don't know. Like I don't know if that's really a huge. It's kind of a pro and a con, but for me, it just made the game like a little
Yeah.
padded out in terms of how long it takes to
Yeah.
finish off battles.
I could see that happening. I think I had less of that issue. My team was very offensive. Like my main team was kind of like was like two characters that were super offense focused and one character that was half support but still had quite good damage. So they were like half offense. So I had like two and a half offense and one half support. And then I would use that for like 90% of battles. And then I had one really defensive character that I would sub in if it was a fight that like I would just get one shot, and so I needed more defense. But I think because of that play style, like I didn't run into as many of those fights, but I could definitely see it because sometimes the enemies do like at the start of their turn just like get half of their health back and a ton of shield, and then on your turn you're just getting rid of the shield and you sort of stalemate. It does have a mechanic built in where I think they're called age stacks or
Yeah, age.
something like
Well,
that.
the age stacks is different. You're talking about
Age
the end of
stacks
the
is different,
battle
right?
when like if you hit like I don't know turn 20 or something, eventually
Mhm.
it starts powering up like both teams so that everyone's attack is just getting stronger every turn, and so you can't
Mhm.
stall forever because eventually you like won't be able to heal
Yeah.
enough.
But that's like the fight has already gone on for quite a
Yeah.
while, and then those things, like, start small and tick up each turn, so, like, it takes a while for it to even become a mechanic, and then it takes a while for that to tick up enough to make a difference, so,
Sometimes that thing would
like
start and I'd be like, "Oh, thank fucking God, now we're gonna get somewhere."
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, so I could see that, but I think it's a virtue of just kind of a play style,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
Um, if I had a complaint, my one issue with the game, because overall I'm extremely positive, like I blew through it, but I think you kind of alluded to at the beginning where you said the first half of the game is better than the second half. And the problem I ran into is that I hit the level cap before I was done. So I know the game has some DLC that we got included with Game Pass, so I don't know if maybe this, that just it didn't raise the level cap enough to justify the DLC new content, because I don't know what part is DLC and what part isn't because it's just so seamless when you play the game.
Yeah, I would have no
Um,
idea either.
but I found I got to level 42. I had like all of my gear was max level. I had shifted all of the mons that I cared about using, which is like kind of like the version of evolution. And then I was no longer getting meaningful XP or anything from battles. Like I would still get money and items, but like you're so rich and
Yeah,
items
it
are
doesn't
like
matter.
not really a huge mechanic. So it doesn't matter. And even if the leveling was just like incredibly slow and I would get a level like every 3 hours, like that would have been fine for me. But that psychological factor of like there's no progression left just really tanked my enthusiasm for playing the game because like the world is cool and the story is, it's cute. It's very like generic kind of RPG, like not the main focus, but serviceable. But it's that progression and the leveling up of your monsters is what's the main factor for me. So by the time when I hit that cap, I just immediately was like, oh, like why bother fighting anything ever now? Like I'll just,
Mhm,
run past
mhm.
things, do the boss fights and get it over with. And I think that was a shame because it's not like I was grinding, like I was being very thorough, but I wasn't like going out of my way to grind or to level up, and so it just kind of like I just lost so much motivation.
Yeah, I was very close to that too. I beat the game and my guys were like level 39 or like 40. So
Mhm.
I was like right at the threshold of when I was gonna like all it would have taken was me backtracking for like one more item that I missed or something, or and I would have been
Mhm.
right in the same position as you. Uh for sure. So I think that's a good point. Um aside from sort of the battling, you just mentioned the story, and I was going to say the same
Mhm.
thing. Like, the story is really just a vehicle for like, oh, something's happened. We need to go to this place now. Like, see
Yeah.
you there, and it's really just is kind of a justification for where you move. One thing that I really did like about it was that there's a function where you can sort of talk to your companion monster, and they'll always give you like really good advice of where to go next, and it's very explicit. Like it's really tough to get lost in this game because they'll
Mhm.
always tell you exactly what you need to do, and it's not some vague hint where it's like, oh, there's enemies somewhere cold, you better find them. It's like, oh, go to the top of this mountain where you're going to find this specific NPC. And when you go find them, you can give them this, and then we'll go do this. And it's like, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing now. I don't need
Yeah,
to worry about like guessing or wandering the map for no reason to like figure
yeah.
out what I'm going to do.
It was such a nice function, and it's even detailed to the point where, like, you can ask about, like, "Here are my 3 main quest objectives, and then here are, like, 3 side quests I've picked up." And it, like, categorized them too, which was super
Mm,
cute.
so
Um,
helpful. So
and
helpful.
I think that's another part of this game that I really appreciate is that there's just tons of little quality of life things such as that. So, aside from the battling and the capturing, the other main component of this game is that it's a Metroidvania. And it's really clever in how it accomplishes that, I think, because you don't get power ups for yourself. You keep capturing different monsters, and each monster has a single ability. You can't adjust this. This is where there's no flexibility in this aspect of it, but they all do one thing outside of battle. So, for example, a lot of the monsters that fly, you can hold onto them and they'll fly you for a second so you can get across a gap
Give
or
you
get
the
a little bit
parakarry
higher.
treatment.
The paracarry, that's right. But there's other ones, like some you can ride, and so you go a little bit faster, and some can put down blocks to let you trigger switches, and so that's how the Metroidvania mechanic works, is that actually, like, your monsters are doing that for you, which I think is a really clever, like, simple but clever thing to do for this style of game where the monsters are the focus. They're also, like, all the mechanics, so that was pretty fun. But obviously, you encounter a lot of these things before you have the monster that's able to deal with it. And you have this beautiful map that you can bring up. It's color coded depending on the areas, and you get these like little symbols you can put down. You can put them anywhere on the map that you want, as many as you want till your heart's content. They have different pictures so you can know that, like, this is this is the treasure chest one that I'm using, and this is the one I'm using for, like, oh, I can't swim here yet. But it also, whenever you put them down, it asks you, like, would you like to make a little note? So if the symbols are not enough for you to differentiate and have your own little system you've made up, you can also just put a note, like, whatever you want. If something's really fucking weird, you're like, you know what? I'm gonna need to know this later. And it's so nice because in older Metroidvanias or a lot of other games, it's like, well, I fucking hope you remember that from 30 hours ago, you idiot.
Yeah.
Because if you don't go jump up here now that you've got triple jump, you can't progress the game anymore. And, like, it can get frustrating and it's so easy to miss things. But in this game, it's like anytime you come across something, it's like the Hollow Knight pin system, but you don't have to buy the pins. You're not limited to how many pins you can put down. It's just whenever you want, go in your map, make a little note for yourself. And it's just such a nice quality of life that, like, I was so happy every time I used it.
Yeah, it was great. I used it a lot too, and I would leave myself funny notes like lots of fire here or something like that. Like there's like multiple orbs of fire.
Yeah.
And I want to like double down and agree with you. Like I really love the way you use the monster's abilities outside of battle. I love how it's kind of like you're locked off from certain areas until you catch a monster with that ability. So it would always be exciting to me when I got an egg for a monster and I'm like, oh, I wonder, like I got to go check what its ability outside of battle is because I might be able to use this. And you can use any monster at any time. You don't need to have it being one of the 6 in your party, which is another quality of life issue. Because
Yeah.
in Pokemon with an HM, if you didn't bring cut, you got to go all the way back to your computer and like withdraw the guy. And in this game, you just have like accessible any monster at all times, like whatever you want. You can just use it, and it's really easy that way. And there's some that are like really rare. A lot of monsters have like that flying ability you mentioned, or like there's orbs on the ground, like a fire orb, and you got to use a fire guy to light it up. But then there's
Mhm.
some that are rare, and there's some that are like they'll make those invisible platforms appear where you couldn't
Right.
jump up on platforms before. And I got like a guy with that ability really close to the end of the game, and so I was like,
Mhm.
oh, thank God there's these customizable pins I can put on the map, and know where to
Yeah.
go back for that. Not if I chose, like, at that point I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna go and beat the game. I don't
Mhm.
really care about getting the chest. But I mean, you could have done that really easily had that been the case. And I just really appreciated in general, like on the map, speaking just a bit more about the Metroidvania, is like I loved the when the game did break up sort of the monster fighting and catching aspects with sort of puzzles, because there's a lot of like switch puzzles or like platforming, not like platforming challenges, but like little things you got to get up to, or like gaps to cross, or in the water, there's like water currents that you got to go around and sort of find your way through a maze, like just little ways to break up sort of the gameplay. And I thought those were fun little challenges. They really made you think for a little bit, but they were solvable. So it was a nice balance of like, change of pace.
Agree, and they were a good difficulty too. Like, I think there was only one of them where I was like, "Oh, fuck, if I don't get this in another minute, I'm gonna look it up." But I didn't end up looking up any of them, but they were satisfying to beat. And like a lot of them are kind of just like, okay, you figure it out and you get through it, and it was kind of cute. But some of them, especially near the end of the game, were like relatively complex. And it's like yeah, they're challenges. You don't need monsters for them. They're just like,
Well,
can
sometimes you
you
do. Sometimes you do.
sometimes you do. Sometimes you do, but sometimes like here's 30 switches and like if you press one, it opens this door but closes this door and like, oh, you really have to
Yeah, you got to
you really have
figure
to
it
get
out.
your mind around it. Um but yeah, I think it's a super cute game. I really enjoyed my time with it more so than I thought I would, even though I was the one to recommend it to people in the first place. I enjoyed it more than I thought I did. And I would love to see like a sequel come out of these guys because it's like I believe it's a small indie studio, and
Yeah,
this
I
is
think
their
it's their
first
only game.
game,
Yeah,
if I
it's
remember correctly.
let's see, Morai Games,
Hmm.
Moirai Games, published by Team 17.
Hmm.
So yeah, everyone check it out. It's a good game, and if you look at it, you'll know right away if it's gonna be for you or not. And
Hmm.
if you think it's for you, trust me, it is, and you should play it.
Yeah.
Is what we can say.
There, there's one other little thing I wanted to shout out as well, and I think it's such a cute little attention to detail. But you have one monster following you at all times, and that monster's the one that you can use its out of combat ability, and you can swap it out like we said on the fly. But all of them kind of have like their own little animation of how they move, and so like like the bird will just flap and fly after you, and there's like a spider and he sort of skitters with all his legs. But some of them just made me smile so much. And even if I wasn't really using their ability, I just would keep swapping them out to see what they all look like. And so, like, there's one that's like a dragon and he flies, but he's like a fat, chunky dragon. And so he'll like kind of like, if you jump, he'll jump and sort of flap, but it like doesn't go very far and he like hits the ground and then he's kind of got to walk again and then he'll try to flap. And it's a lot of little touches like that they didn't have to put in the game, but like clearly it's such a passion project. They were like, no, this stupid chunky dragon's gonna have trouble flying, whereas like the bat does it no problem, and like
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it was just really, really like had a lot of life to it.
And shout out to that bat, by the way. If you want a good
Yeah.
monster, let me tell you, that bat is the way to go. Okay, everybody, you don't forget that.
Oh,
uh,
the other thing, shout out to the little lightning knight guy.
mhm.
He doesn't seem like he's green. He doesn't seem like much, but let me tell you, he gets an evolution that really, like, he was not on my team. I saw his evolution and I put him on my team and I put like all my fucking level up candies into that guy. And let's just say we praised the sun together.
All right, let's leave that very cryptic reference, which I'm sure no one
Hmm.
gets, in the in the rearview mirror here, because we're an hour in and we have a second half of the show to do, which it's gonna be a good
Hmm.
conversation, of course, about games that we want to return, that may have not come out for a while, because this was inspired by Ninja Turtles, what we played, which of course was one of these examples. So, Kate, this was your idea of what to talk about on the show today. So why don't you lead us off with what game would you like to see return, or what's one of the ones you have?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to point out that I've officially named this section in Turtles Glory as the Cowabunga Comeback. And so I've come up with a few games I would like to see make a Cowabunga comeback. Um, so I think there's a couple here that I've written down that I think are for both of us.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe we'll go through this quickly, and that is going to be Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah, that's a good call. I obviously would be down. The only reason I hadn't put that on my list was because we got Triangle Strategy, which is
Yeah.
like, kind of a spiritual successor. So I didn't want to be greedy and ask for too much. But you're right. That would be sweet.
Yeah, that's fair. That was just the first thing that always comes to mind. The other one is Sonic Adventure. Like, we always
Mm-hmm.
talk about how excited we'd be to get Sonic Adventure,
Adventure
3,
3. Yeah, none of this
maybe
open
one
world
day.
Sonic. Give me Sonic Adventure 3. Uh,
Exactly, that's what the people really want, like, come on, Sonic. And then the third one I put down for both of us is Paper Mario, because Thousand Year Door came out in 2004, and we haven't had a Paper Mario game since, and that just seems weird, like, where did it go?
yeah, where did it go?
Mario,
Who could
where did it
possibly say?
go?
Who could say?
So, I thought that might be nice.
In the same vein, I wrote down for me one for both of us was Battle Network, Mega Man Battle Network. But of course, we're getting
Yeah,
the collection coming out now, so I feel like that's
right.
not a great answer because there's so many of those I haven't played that I'll be looking forward to that collection. But you're right, Paper Mario, like Paper Mario 3. It's
Mhm.
been so long since we had a game in that series, and yeah, it would be great. It would
Mhm.
be great. So for me, the first thing that came to my mind when I thought about what game I'd like to make a comeback is it's really weird, and I think I did bring it up on the show one time before, and I do not remember the context, but it's Mod Nation Racers, Kate. That
Oh,
game would be
that's a cool
so
one.
cool in the
Yeah.
modern day. So for anyone that's not familiar, Mod Nation Racers is basically like it's a kart racer, right? It's like a Mario Kart style game, very similar. You get power ups and you're racing around tracks and stuff. But the whole crux of the game is that everything is sort of user generated content. So you could make your own racers and customize them and sort of like dreams almost, I guess, but maybe not quite to that extent. More like Little Big Planet,
Like Little Big Planet,
more
that's
like
exactly
that.
what I was thinking.
Except you can build your own courses and your racers. Like I built like Phoenix Wright. I built like a Justice Mobile and
Yeah.
like Luigi and stuff like that. And I'm not really much of a created content person, to be honest. But what's so cool about this game is that it actually just felt really good to play. Like there's not a lot of kart racers where you play them and you're like, Mario Kart is just such a gold standard. Like I don't even think CTR feels as good a lot of the time. And Mod Nation Racers to me was actually one of the ones that did feel really good to control. And the biggest problem with the game back on the PS3 was that it just took so goddamn long to load everything because everything was custom content. Like there was nothing standard, right? It was like you're
Yeah.
loading in and you're playing online and you're loading everyone else's stuff, and then the track is custom and all the decorations on the track are custom. But you know what, everybody, with the PS5 and the SSD and like all this potential cloud technology coming in
Yeah,
from
that are
all
online
that stuff,
servers
like
and things.
all this kind of stuff, I think Mod Nation Racers would be like a sick game in 2022 with like the quality of life updates to like how it could function online. Like I think it would be a lot of fun.
That is such a cool one. I never would have thought of that, but I think it's like I kinda want that more than anything I've considered. That's so fun. I love it. I love that a lot. I'll follow with one here that I think is kind of like less of a game and more of like a genre that we don't really see. And I would love to see more like Rock Band or like Guitar
Mm-hmm.
Hero back, because like they were just so fun and you could play with anyone. Like I remember like we got our dad like for Christmas one year because like it was just so fun to have the whole family together, and then you'd like play a song on the guitar and then you'd swap out like I'm on the drums now, someone's singing, and it was just like anyone could play, and it was just like, but everyone, you couldn't not have fun playing those games. But there was also like a lot of difficulty. Like I remember like when Guitar Hero was out and it was like, oh, I'm gonna get the highest level on these songs, and like you kind of do genuinely like build up skill and like rhythm playing those games. But like they just don't really come out. Beat Saber is the newest one that I'd say is like sort of in that genre, and I fucking love Beat Saber. But you can't play that with your friends and family, right? And like you also can't really like have a couple drinks playing Beat Saber because like it's gonna make you feel a little sick. But you can absolutely have a few drinks and like be on the Rock Band drum set.
I agree completely, and I'm so sad that there was sort of that, early 2010s explosion of those games. Like there was so many Rock Band games, so many Guitar Hero. I think it just like really burnt people out. Whereas, there I feel like there will always be room for a comeback for those games. And I know they did like Guitar Hero Live back on like the PS4, but it just wasn't the same thing. And I don't know, you're right. Like getting together with a bunch of people in a living room and playing those plastic instruments and just blasting the music is so much
Yeah.
fun. it's great, and I would love to see that come back too. And I'm sure it will one day. Like it's just the pandemic, I feel like, has really thrown a wrench into that as well. And, but it'll come back one day for sure. There's no doubt about it. Those are cool. My next one is so let me tell you a story. So
Okay.
I actually sent this to you the other day, Kate, but I was listening to Spotify and I was on the daily shuffle kind of thing. The recommended
I know where this is going.
recommended music for me, and I was listening to, it was a lot of punk music came up, a little like punk rock, and I came across this new band called Dinosaur Pileup, who, by the way, shout out to Dinosaur Pileup, great band, really gotten into your music. But they did a cover of a song, Kate, and I was like, I got to send this over because we have a bit of an in-joke about this. And so the song's called It's Tricky. And anyone that's played a certain snowboarding game knows this song very, very well. And it got me thinking that, SSX is a series that has not been around for a long time. And we know Kate is such a big fan of skateboarding games with Tony Hawk that why not also... because you did like SSX. This is the funny part.
See, this is the thing. This is the difference. Snowboarding games are good because snowboarding games are they're like Mario Kart. They're like racing games. You're not just puttering around a skate track by yourself like a loser. You're going down
the skate track.
That's not what they're called. Look, I'm a little flustered. You've gotten me very upset by saying snowboarding games are in that hell of skateboarding because they're not. They're cool. You're going down the mountain. You're doing cool tricks. And the tricks have a meaning because they give you speed to beat the race. They're not just, points
no, you're right.
So you can go
right.
Slag everyone off wow, you didn't nose turn flip like me, you loser.
I don't know what this has become, but this is a completely different conversation now. Yeah.
Anyway,
SSX though, great game. And the last SSX game, Kate, what year do you think it came out in?
Oh God. Okay, so I think it was on the GameCube.
There was one. There's been one since then. They did a modern.
Has there been one since?
Yeah.
Okay. The GameCube is the last one I remember playing. I'm gonna say 2008.
Not bad. It's 2012. They did a SSX. I think it was like a reboot. Didn't do very well. But Tricky is the one. That's the GameCube, Xbox, PS2 one. Yeah. It was so good. Your character's doing the worm on the board and doing the coffee grinder on their board and stuff. And
imagine watching the Olympics and
amazing.
The snowboarders are going, and he starts doing the worm on his board.
Yeah, I would just love that arcade style. You're right. The racing is really it was really fun, right? You're going down the ramps and trying to. Something going on behind you?
If you can't hear it, then we're fine.
No, we're good. We're all good. I think someone might be power washing, folks, if you hear
someone might be power washing. Don't worry about it.
Anyway, SSX, that's all I had to say. It's a great game. People will agree with me. We've had a lot of snowboarding games since. There's been that downhill game and that game with 12 different extreme sports. But you know what?
Right.
No one wants that. Just give us SSX back with all its style and its vibe, and we'll be good.
And of course, the soundtrack. That was a big part of it. That's awesome. Okay, I have the next one, which is what I call the depressing part of my brainstorming. So I'm just gonna quick fire this the sad slew of games. And these are the games that just got canceled instead of they were a good game, we just never made another one. These are the games that got thrown in the dumpster fire. So this is Atlas Reactor. Which
rest
was,
in peace.
My favorite online. It was so fun. It was a turn-based game, and it was 3v3 online.
It was 4v4.
Was it 4v4? I thought it was 3. Okay, well we had 3 people that
we played with 3, but we had a fill. We had a fill.
Right, we had a fill. So yeah, it's 4v4. Clearly, you can tell how much I loved it. It's been a while. But it was cool. It was turn-based, so you'd pick it was kind of like an Overwatch style thing where all the heroes were unique and had different abilities. But the gimmick of it was that it was turn-based, but everybody picked their move at the same time, and then it would play out. So it was just basically the ultimate cat and mouse chess game of that person's gonna dodge, so I'm not gonna shoot them where they are. I'm gonna shoot them where they're gonna be. And then, but they'd be standing there, be like, yeah, I'm in a shit spot. They're gonna think I'm gonna dodge. So should I just stand here instead? And it was just so big brain. You were that gif of that math lady that's
yeah.
that was playing it the whole time. But that game kind of got canceled and they shut the servers down. So rip on
Yeah, rest
that.
in peace. I love that game
And
too.
it was
Very
so
sad.
good. And then in the same vein, people are gonna flame me for this probably, but I fucking loved Artifact, which was Valve's card game. It was like the MOBA card game where you like the 3 lanes and you played into them, and there's something about that card game where like I wouldn't have thrown it away in like a month and got bored of it like other ones. I would have played that till the day I died, but they threw that game out.
Until
And
the
then
day the game died.
until the game, yeah, I flipped the script on that one. And then the last one in my slew of rest in peace is after 2 years of being in kind of like it's still alive, but we're not doing shit for it. Heroes of the Storm has officially been canceled. So the servers are still up. We can still play, but there's no new content coming to it. And it's effectively dead. And like, it's so sad.
Damn, rest in peace. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, all 3 of those. Maybe one day will Cowabunga come back.
Hey, Heart Heroes isn't even dead yet. It can't make a comeback till it dies.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we could get a new champion. It's been 2 years since Hogger came out, so that might be nice.
Well, don't hold your breath. Eh?
No.
I have 2 left on my list. One of them I'll say really quick, which is that I'd love to see a new like Castlevania. I know there was Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which came out, which was from the same creator, but
it wasn't
sort of
good,
it wasn't as good overall. And it just makes me think like Metroid Dread was the first new 2D Metroid in so long, and it was such a great game. Like I really loved how they were able to modernize it, and add some stuff with the Emmys and whatnot. I would love to see sort of that level of treatment given to Castlevania and what they can do, just because it's like the other half of Metroidvania, and it would just be cool to see like a modern take on that. But the other one I have, which is it's a game that kind of was dead on arrival that I would love to see, is I would love to see a better take on the Order 1886, which is that PS4 launch game. Which I actually wrote down something from Wikipedia here. If so, people listening, forget I mentioned the Order 1886 and just listen to what this game is described as, okay? Set in 1886, an alternate history of steampunk London, the game follows the legendary Knights of the Round Table as they battle to keep the world safe from half-breeds such as werewolves and vampires, as well as fringe organizations rebelling against the government. Like, come on. That sounds fucking cool. The problem is that the game apparently had really good production value, graphics, technical achievement, but the game was just super short, story was really generic, and the gameplay was just like not where it needed to be. A lot of like quick time events standing in for action scenes when they, I guess, just didn't, give you the ability to like, not that there's anything wrong with quick time events, but when they're just thrown in because you just don't have the ability to do stuff like in an action sense as well, like, and they're not used as like add-ons to the action. I feel like that's the problem. And so I would love to see like, okay, let's take the bones of what this game was supposed to be and the setting, which is really cool, and actually like flesh it out and give it a more expanded, like proper game. I think that would be really, really interesting.
I feel like that game could be like almost like a Dishonored kind of style game, and like it really could be successful in the same way that Dishonored was. But you're right, it just sort of like flopped, and given like another like 4 years in another team, like it's such a cool premise.
Yeah, so that would be like my pick, just morbidly. Like, I don't know if it was to get like a Cowabunga comeback, but like not really a comeback, just more of like, let's forget the original and just give it a second try at coming out and being something cool. I really think there's a recipe that could succeed for that. Like, yeah, you're like you said, Dishonored, but like what if it was Dishonored sort of mixed with the world of like a Bloodborne sort of thing, but just with some steampunk elements in there along with the horror. Like it's just so prime for being cool.
And I feel like that's like something that we're kind of missing. Like steampunk is not it's a genre that everybody's very aware of, but not a genre we really get a ton of stuff in. Like we get sort of adjacent stuff, like cyberpunk is a big genre now. But like that old timey like steampunk kind of stuff, like Dishonored is kind of really the only game I can think of that is in that style that did super well.
Yeah.
But like everybody likes steampunk.
You're right.
Why don't we have more stuff?
Steampunk SSX.
We drive airships now.
Yeah. I guess like RPGs really are the only ones, and like I think there was some Bioshock. Bioshock I think could be kind of steampunky.
Bioshock Infinite was kind of steampunky.
But
Yeah,
you're right. There's not a lot. There's not a lot.
there could be more when you just think of like how many fantasy games there are and like just how like even
Yeah.
like Gothic Victorian is kind of like relatively big, but like yeah, steampunk.
It's a
Um,
missed opportunity, hey?
yeah, why not? Something different. Okay, I've got one more. It's not steampunk, but there could be a steampunk character in it very, very easily. And that is just another Danganronpa game,
Oh,
please.
yeah.
Like,
Please, please.
I don't think the franchise is dead because it was, a successful trilogy, and there's no reason why it like couldn't come back at any time. But it's just been a while, and they were such fun games, and like, you could feasibly make 1,000,000 of them if you really
Oh,
wanted to.
yeah. I'm sure they will, too. It's not dead. It's just sleeping right
Yeah.
now.
Like Chunsoft's taking a nap.
Yeah. But Monokuma just needs a nap, and they'll be back. All right. Well, that's all I've got on my list. I don't know if you've got any more honorable mentions or. No, we're good to go.
No, I mean, give me Sekiro too, but it's not old enough yet to to say it's dead. So
there you go. In my honorable mention, I guess would be similar to the Order 1886. Just give me an Avengers game that's not an MMO online. Like, just I would like an Avengers game, kind of like Guardian style, but just Avengers. That would be great. Okay, well, that's the podcast for today, folks. Usually we would, like we said at the top of the show, do a listener mail question here. But for today, we're just going to remind you to please write in some questions for us to circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com or on Twitter in the links below. Thank you all for joining us on this lovely episode. Next time is episode 60, Kate, with 60 is the official show here. We're getting up there. We're going to be at 100 before we know it.
Yeah, we're on like... we can get a discount at Denny's at this point.
Yeah. Well, we'll try that out next time. We'll see what they say. But thank you for joining us, everybody. Hope you're all safe and healthy. And we'll see you again next week for some lovely podcast experience episode, or another episode of the podcast experience, we should say. So we'll see you soon, and take care.